In this episode, I speak to Dr. Joni Carley about the alchemy of power and how values are the link between the tangible and the intangible. We discuss the need to not be blindsided by your own irrelevance and the changes brought by the global wake-up call. Joni stresses the need for enabling your employees to have more mojo and uses Zappos as an example. Listen up to the rest of the conversation. Before we begin our conversation, here is a quick shout out to the pathologically curious. Check out the Maverick Paradox magazine. It's a digital magazine written by Mavericks for business owners and professionals. You can find the magazine at themaverickparadox.com. The magazine's aim is to provoke maverick leadership everywhere. Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey. If you would like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. And today, our guest is Dr. Joni Carley. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am good. I'm nice and relaxed and looking forward to this conversation.
Me too.
Joni, tell us about you.
Well, I wear a few different hats. Mostly, though, I focus on consulting and working a little deeper than most consultants because I recognize that culture and values are really critical to success. And so I tend to dig a little deeper. I'm the author of The Alchemy of Power, Mastering the Invisible Factors of Leadership. And that book breaks into the metaphysics of leadership. Now, metaphysics is the science of causality, of what causes what, the philosophy and the science of causality. So, most of an iceberg is below the surface. Well, the same thing. Most of what makes people tick is below the surface. And so I have traveled the world. I've been in the jungle with a tribe of headhunters to learn from their shamans. I've been in the African bush. I've been in all kinds of Asian temples. I've had the privilege of having many indigenous teachers. And I wanted to bring that all together in a way that was usable for leaders and actually had application to what's on a leader's desk right now, because that practical application is so critical. But without reaching a little deeper into these deeper things, people tend to just spin wheels looking for one solution after another. And so I use these skills at the United Nations. I use them with small businesses, large businesses, nonprofit organizations. I work with leaders to create the cultures that are going to bring their desires and their missions to fruition.
Wow, sounds all pretty cool. As soon as you said the metaphysics of leadership, I was like, right, I know what I'm going to talk about. So tell me more.
Yeah, well, metaphysics gets a bad rap because we tend to think of it as what I call my book, The Fluffy Myth. So we've all been acculturated to believe that anything other than the numbers, the data, which I love. I think those things are important. The widgets, what's produced, that's what's important. And that everything else is inconsequential, fluffy stuff. Mm-hmm. But there are absolutely no studies, no data. There's nothing anywhere that substantiates that myth. In fact, we know it's exactly the opposite. Just like I said before with the iceberg, it's 90% of the iceberg is below water. And that's where culture, values, that's where the things that really motivate people. Do you know your values motivate you more than your genetics, more than your race? They've even studied twins. We know that values are our most primal drivers. They make the difference of what people do and what they don't do and how they do it. And when you can work at that level, it's like magic. And I use alchemy in my book because Alchemy is really using the principles of metaphysics consciously. So we tend to think of alchemy as turning lead into gold. That's the old mythology, but that's an extremely limited idea of what alchemy is. Alchemy is producing more than the sum of parts. Excuse me. So, for example, if you had the same raw materials, the same education training of the staff, the same basic background of a CEO, and then you have very different outcomes. You have one product that is kind of crappy, let's say the lead, it's not put together right. You have a team falling out, maybe even lost a team member in the process. Then you have the other one that exceeded expectations, that has a phenomenal product, that's innovative, that has a team that wants to go out for a beer afterwards, even though they just worked a really long, hard day together. What's the difference? The difference isn't the physical things or the training. The difference is alchemical. It's energetic. It's values dependent. It's culture dependent. And until you actually consciously dig down and manage these things, which you can do, you can measure them and you can manage them. It's just most people don't know that. And so they skip that part to their own peril.
Fascinating. I do agree with you that leadership in the past has all been about the numbers, that stupid thing about if you don't, if you can't record it down, you can't measure it. If you can't measure it, it's not going to happen, which is stupid. It's like saying trust isn't important in leadership because you can't get a distinct measure for it. I mean, it's just it's just pointless.
Well, the thing is, sorry.
No, carry on.
The thing is that we can measure it. I use a system called Barrett Values, cultural transformation tools, and we actually quantify values as a way of measuring culture. And then we can measure it over time. And we get a baseline. So this is data-based, but values-driven. Mm-hmm. And so values are the go-between between the intangible and the tangible. They are the link between these two things. And when you break them down, and they're also the building blocks of culture, right? When people come together in any kind of group, that group has its own distinct culture, whether it's recognized or not. And that culture really determines how that group is going to act together. And what's fundamentally at the basis of it is the values that they share.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So what do people say when you explain about the alchemy of leadership?
They say all different things depending on who they are. For some people, their eyes glaze over and it's not the book for them. And other people, I have to say, it's almost like a relaxation sets in because they may not have thought about it so much consciously, but it's like a relief because they know. They know, and they already feel some sort of alignment around this. They know there's been a missing piece they haven't been able to put their finger on. And not only not been able to put their finger on, but because of all this acculturation we have that thinks this is fluffy, crazy stuff, they kind of do a distancing from it, and they might even hide it. When I first started at the UN, people couldn't. We had people. I was working with very high level leaders, and they were in tears that it was hard to fulfill the mission they came there to fulfill because, and this is true not just there but all over the place. The culture just didn't even accommodate what the mission was. And there is very unique because the mission, like when I work with nonprofits or NGOs, their missions are very socially strong, right? They're for social good. And but yet what's happening within doesn't always match up. And so the frustration comes up, and we call that entropy. It's energy not going toward mission fulfillment. So I'll give you an example. If there's silo mentality, information hoarding, control, those kinds of negative values, if they're playing out, then people, you can't get the information you need. It might be on a desk right next to you, but you can't get it because just the way the culture is running. Well, that's costly. Because every time somebody has to reinvent the wheel because they can't access some information, you can do the math with their paycheck and start to get some sense of what it's costing. But that's not the whole price. That, by the way, can be quite high in and of itself. But the rest of the price is, okay, so now they're around the coffee pot. Are they being chill with each other because they're aggravated that they can't relate around a piece of information that somebody really needs and somebody else is playing a control bit with? Or are they popping with, gee, I want to do this and this sounds interesting, I got that information and I was thinking this, and what do you think about that? Imagine that around the coffee pot and how that's going to pay off compared to, I'm not telling you. Right? There's a price to that. And we can actually quantify that. And that's really where the breakthrough is now. And more people, when you ask how do people relate to this, again, it's almost like a relief. It's an inner knowing that they've had and that they can relax into. They have a way of thinking about it, of framing it, with which most of us don't. I mean, I've gone down this road for 20 years, and I have a doctorate in it. But I have to tell you, it took almost 15, 18 years for there to be a there around this doctorate, because it just wasn't understood in the culture. But now it is. So again, in answer to your question, more and more people, before it was kind of a, conversation. Now it's oh yeah, I get it. That's what I want. The world is in a very transformational place. Like COVID has brought us to a having to invent new normals. And people know that we can't invent a new normal around the same pillars that we used before, which was profit at any cost, that kind of thinking. We know that was never a plan for survival. And that's true more than ever. And now we understand that the world is interdependently co-arising. We are all in this together. The physicists told us this a long time ago, but now we understand that until all countries manage this, no country is going to be safe. And that's not just true with a virus. It's really true with every bit of everything in our lives. This world is interrelated. And if you're sitting at your desk, you don't have time to think of those big, broad concepts, but in a way you don't have time not to, because that's where the world's going. And one of the points I make in my book is that leaders can find themselves blindsided by their own irrelevance if they don't keep this thinking on their radar, if they don't expand their thinking to have a little greater understanding of this. Not that they have to turn their professional lives in this direction, because they still have to do what they have to do. But it's really time in the world to come to a greater understanding and a larger consciousness of how you're functioning and what's going to constitute success moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's all true. I remember reading Stephen Covey's Speed of Trust book in 2008, and really sort of talking about trusted leadership, and I started specifically including the element of trust in the leadership programs that I designed. And it was always accepted when obviously you're delivering the training, but it was always like a surprise, which I think is quite fascinating, because there is that kind of need for trust, and as Stephen Covey calls it, the trust tax that's on something. But I think certainly back then you put up with it. Do you know what I mean? Because I remember, being an employee and people saying, I don't trust my boss, and people going, yeah, me neither. But it was just like, anyway, what's next? Who's getting the coffee? It's only really kind of now, I think, that people are going, oh yeah. I think, I was talking to some colleagues about what's trending right now, and I said, what I find really fascinating is people are going, people are our biggest assets. So for decades, people have been saying that because it looked good. And now it's like a wake-up call, and people go, it really matters if people are stressed, we're just at work, and, they don't trust the people we put in charge. Wow, that's costing us money, and they that's costing us competitive advantage. We need to do something about it. It's kind of like, you know, when you've been doing that kind of thing for absolutely decades, and now it's just this groundswell of people saying, you know what, if we overwork our staff, it's a really bad thing. It's like, seriously, it took a pandemic to realise, you know, or like, you know,
global wake-up call.
Yeah, it's like, you know what, if people trusted their leaders, you know, they'd be happy and they'd work more. They would benefit to the customers. It's like this global shock, and it's like, seriously, it took a pandemic to realise that out. But she's really great in the sense that we can now move forward, because I think it's here to stay. I think it's also not just the pandemic, it's the Generation Z, late millennials, in huge numbers.
Yeah, you know, they don't tolerate the crazy stuff the way we do.
No, and you know, I just this morning I was reading this statistic, and it said, it's certainly relevant in the UK. I'm not sure about globally, but I suspect in a lot of Western societies it probably runs true, where it says something like 40% of Generation Z and late millennials will not work for a company that don't make their diversity and inclusion absolutely clear. You know, and it's interesting that it has taken, I suppose, like anything with supply and demand, isn't it? It has taken a great swell of individuals to say, I'm not putting up with this, for corporations to go, oh, we need to do something about it. Yeah. Because when those numbers were small, they weren't that interested.
Well, and it's not just trust. Stephen Covey was a groundbreaker and definitely paved the way for a lot of this, as did a few other wonderful people back then. But trust is one of the values that we measure, and it's a critical one, but we measure on 7 levels of values, and trust comes around level 2 or 3 of internal work. But so level 1 is just, are the lights on? Are people safe? Are we making a profit? Just the basics. You know, are the numbers reasonable and honest? And level 7 is great is good. And level 6 is, you know, coming out into the community, connecting, you know, relationships and trust within the wider community. And by the way, Generation Z is also saying the same thing about environment, climate. So, you know, but when you break these out and you can show data on trust and on these other, if trust comes up, there are about 100 values that people look at and they choose 20. And it's pretty interesting how these line up with each other. And then we say, what are the top 20 in this organization? And if you have lack of trust, or if you have, you know, we measure what's going on and what people aspire to. So if you don't have trust in what's going on and you have trust in the aspiration column, then you say, okay, this is a leap, but it's not somebody like you or me coming in and say, okay, people, you have to learn to trust each other. Now everybody start trusting him. You become trustworthy. You know, I mean, that kind of petitioning is, sometimes it works, but it's kind of iffy.
I know, you need to change behavior, don't you?
Well, if you show them data and you say, this is, you know, there's a lot of plots and dots and graphs and things that come out with these assessments. And so if you show the CEO, here's a trust factor that has come up. And this is something that you want to get these numbers, you want to measure a year later and see how we're doing. But you can bring the group wisdom in and say, okay, so what's this lack of trust look like? What would it look like if you have more trust? Where's the leap here? And the group wisdom is so extraordinary. It blows me away every single time. Talk about an alchemical factor, you know, that group wisdom is magic. Every time it's right there in the data, they will tell you how to get to trust. In one organization, it might be doing work at level 1 or 2. In another organization, it might be doing work at 5 or 6 or 7. But you don't really know unless you measure. Okay, and that's one of the problems with consultants come in, and they may come in with a trust or a inner relationship agenda. It just might not be the issues, you know, so. Yeah, until you quantify what the issues are, you're kind of striking in the dark.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's the biggest problems with, so in this country, we call them the big 4 consultancies. But I suppose it's the same equivalency, you know, the massive, big branded consultancy with thousands of people, because it's a one-size-fit-all type approach. Right. which it provides perceived safety by the corporation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the work is what you need. So 2 questions. First question, you talk about 7 levels of values. What does that come from? What's that referring to?
That's the Barrett Cultural Transformation Tools. They've been used, they're in 27 languages. They've been used for everything from 3-person offices to 1-person 360 evaluations to 60,000 person companies to schools, municipalities. It's a set of tools that are pretty much the same tool adapted to these different applications. And they give you a way to drill down with data on values and culture in a way that you can measure over time, and that is 100% inclusive, and that is delineated on these 7 levels so that you can really kind of bite it off and chew it. Like sometimes you see there's a lot of energy around level one or 2, which is great. But then if you're missing those higher levels, people are missing purpose. They're missing, these greater good kind of conversations that Gen X has and Gen Z has. Those are things that you want a full spectrum organization across the 7 levels. And people think, this is another part of that acculturation and the fluffy myth, that we think that once we get all those profits together, then we'll have the latitude to think about those other things. But the studies do not bear that out. Of course, the profits have to be coming in. Of course, it has to be a strong company. But thinking of that as the first thing, and it's a hierarchical thing, and eventually we'll get out there to those other things, those other, larger aspirations. That's not a good recipe for success. That we're very, very clear on. When an organization is thinking full spectrum all along, and when we plot this out, their dots are more equally spread between these, that's the companies that are having the greater profits and the greater expansion, the higher quality outcomes.
Definitely. And what are the invisible factors of leadership?
Well, it's these metaphysical factors. Trust is one. What kind of person do we have? Is somebody doing their own personal homework, right? We all have personal homework to do. And that's the nature of the human condition, is that it always has room to grow. And the nature of the human spirit is that it wants to expand. It always wants to do more and be more and have a better world. That's just how we're wired. And so really looking at that, capitalizing on that, consciously working with that, consciously developing ourselves to go a little deeper, to anchor and root what we're trying to do in stronger ground so that we can grow higher. Thinking of it like a tree. And you can also think of it, so a tree, the deeper it roots, the higher it can grow. You can also think about it like a culture in a lab dish, like an invisible, the culture that we're in is like the water we swim in as fish. But if you think of it like a lab dish, like a culture in a lab dish will grow some things and it won't grow other things. The same thing as a culture in an organization or a whole country, whatever you think of a culture as, but your organization absolutely has a culture. And does that culture accommodate great things? Does it accommodate cooperation? Does it accommodate innovation? Does it accommodate service? Does it accommodate coaching and mentoring and growing people from within? And does it accommodate relationships growing so that when people are working and the pedal hits the metal and people are stressed, that those relationships are going to not only hold but support into greater good, greater growth, and better quality outcomes? Or does your culture naturally breed infighting, kind of, I'll get to it when I can, or I'm not doing that because of how she treated me? What's really going on in the cultural mix that you're not conscious of? So the metaphysics is causality. So we're talking about what causes what. And the metaphysics of leadership is am I managing things at a causal level? Am I being causal in what I'm doing? Am I being reactive? Am I being, you might get what you want by pushing and prodding and insulting people, but you're not causing real things to happen. You may get, superficially, you may get one result that is okay with you. But when you bring in that metaphysical factor that is way more powerful, you get surprises that are way beyond just getting the next widget out that doesn't completely fail.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So how can we improve our leadership?
Well, for me, I think it really comes down to measure. We measure what matters. Start measuring these things. Measure your culture and do a 360. Measure your leadership in terms of culture, in terms of the people around you. Read my book, The Alchemy of Power. It's on Amazon. I think, and there are other authors also these days who are getting at these. They're both deeper and broader, right? It's deeper. It's saying, go into who you are as a person, do that personal homework, do that personal expansion, and make the culture such that everybody is incentivized to do that. So like Zappos, I toured there, the shoe company. They are an amazing culture. When you walk in the door, there's a big chalkboard, and it says, on Tuesday, the tailor will be here. On Wednesday, the dry cleaner will take your stuff if you bring it. On Thursday, the dog groomer and the car wash company is coming. So then on Saturday and Sunday, you're not running errands, you're doing the fun stuff. So that Monday you come back jazzed. A big concept I talk about in my book is mojo. In fact, the book is mostly about mojo. And mojo is that zip zazz, that energy, that consciousness, that wow, that thing that makes life live, right? We can put all the elements of a grape into a lab dish. We can't make a grape because we don't have the metaphysical capacity, but we can kind of cut in on it in the human spirit. When people's values are being met, their mojo goes up. They're a lot more present. They're going to bring that energy, that spark, that thing that makes life more than just a collection of elements, those internal drivers. So that's the kind of stuff I get at in the book is how do you, one thing is ask every day, how's my mojo? And how's the mojo of this group? If you walk into not everybody's in party mode. We're not talking about that. Like, you don't want to walk into the office and see everybody in, rah, rah. But to see, like, is the energy flowing? Are people able to express themselves? Are they thinking? Are they, is there no fear of saying something creative that might be really crazy? But that's what the root of most creative and new and innovative things are, is there's that little bit of, this is out of the box. And is there the latitude in the culture to bring that kind of thinking forward or not? And if you can kind of start to tune into how's the mojo, and you can tell, are people sitting there kind of suppressed, just getting through the day, getting their job done? That's low mojo. Are people moving around? Is there a buzz? Are they thinking of things that we might have to amend those things or toss them out completely? But is the line open here? And that's a mojo question. Is the line open for innovation, for greater connectivity between people, for thinking outside of our own little world here and thinking who are we in the greater world here, and how does that manifest and cycle back into making us better by being better global citizens?
Fantastic. So I think that's a good place to stop. But before we do that, is there anything that you would like to add? I should have asked you a question that I didn't.
No, I think just really encouraging leaders to take that dive, to expand consciousness, to actually consider their leadership consciousness. Mm-hmm. Consciousness is such a big word. It doesn't mean you have to go meditate, although that would help. But sometimes just a well-timed trip to a bathroom stall to take a breath, to get in sync with where your consciousness is, and to be conscious of your consciousness, to be conscious of the consciousness that's going on around you, and of what you're building how that supports greater or lesser consciousness. If you can go there, and that's my book, The Alchemy of Power. There's just so much around this work right now. In some ways, there's a glut. There's some real garbage out there around this stuff, but there's some great stuff. And wherever you're led, whether that's to yoga, meditation, sitting by a stream, playing with a child, getting back into some music, or getting a lump of clay, or whatever it takes to just even sitting back, pushing your chair back away from your desk, and just taking a breath, taking a moment, again, just taking a breath. Sometimes that's all it is just taking that moment to take a conscious breath. Sometimes that's all it is just, I call it yin. There's yin and yang. Yang is the data and the getting the work done, and it's important. We need yin and yang to make the world go round. But we've had yangitis. We've been so far in that yang domain for so many millennia that this is a foreign language for a lot of people. And so that would be my parting advice: is start to get comfortable with the language. If you're already comfortable with the language, have confidence in it and expand. But start to dip your toe or swim or dive deep into this area of metaphysics, of causality, of the deeper mechanisms that ultimately are the drivers of what you're going to make happen.
Okay, that's great. So, Joni, if I asked you to come back again to talk about something else, would you come back?
I would love to.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Dr. Joni as much as I enjoyed having it. At the Maverick Paradox, we improve your impact and influence by enabling you to effectively strategize, innovate, and execute. To find out more, contact us at judith@maverickparadox.com. Thank you. If you are pathologically curious and would love to find out more about the Maverick Paradox, then please subscribe to this podcast on one of the popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, you could explore our resources on Mavericks at maverickparadox.com or read the Maverick Paradox magazine. We publish frequently each week. If you subscribe, you will get our monthly newsletter. And let's not forget my book, The Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders. For those that love a good discussion, you could apply to join our exclusive Facebook group. Finally, if you would like to work with us or are interested in the Maverick at work, check out maverickparadox.co.uk.